Good morning, everyone. Good evening for some people from the state. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Shin and will moderate the talk today. I welcome you all to our KU Global Lecture Series focusing on data in the era of digital transformation. Today is the second session of the program composed of 4 different lectures. We have 356 people registered for this event, not only from Korea University, but also from more than 40 other universities and institutes around the world, which is very exciting. Some of us are joining in the Zoom, but also some people watching on YouTube. Thank you again for coming. At the end of this lecture, I hope you will be able to cultivate ever richer harvest of insight from data analytics. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Bearman. Professor Peter Buma is co-professor of social science in the Department of Sociology. He is the director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Innovative Theories and Empirics. He is the president of the American Assembly at Columbia University. Not so surprisingly, he is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Science and National Academy of Science. He has widely published papers and books. I would say the most innovative social science research. This list is extremely long, so I shouldn't even start there. Also, he's a recipient of numerous awards, including Director's Pioneers Award from National Institute of Health and Guggenheim Award, Columbia University Presidential Award for Outstanding Teaching. As you may have noticed, or you have already know that Professor Bearman was my PhD advisor back at Columbia University. I'm not shy about telling you that whenever I had a meeting with Peter or he was giving a lecture, I've never left the room without multiple wow moments. I felt extremely lucky just to be in a room with someone with impressive ideas and extraordinary insights. Today, we gather in a virtual room with Professor Bearman. I look very much forward to the upcoming enlightenment moments. I hope you don't mind dealing with this pressure. And after his talk, Professor Lanu Kim from KAIST will open up for discussion. Please join me in welcoming Professor Peter Bearman.
Thanks so much. Really kind introduction. And yeah, that's a lot of pressure. And I'll see if I can give you, even a half of a wow moment. It's really, it's a pleasure to be here. And Una and I were just talking about, well, it's also complicated to even say where here is. I'm in Western Massachusetts. The 4 co-authors of this paper, or these series of papers that I'm going to talk about, are scattered all over the place. Chad is in New York. Sichi is in Hong Kong. Bill William McAllister is on Long Island, and Jack is either in New York or Virginia. This is a collection of short talks that are broadly about thinking about measuring the liberal arts. It's a problem I thought was related to the theme of this series, big data and humanism, and thinking about how to measure what happens in a liberal arts education. It's a difficult problem. What is a liberal arts education? Can we identify its unique signature? What might it do for students who experience it? How can we improve the opportunities that we give our students? These are the sorts of questions that this set of papers will address. And they're real problems. It's true that today the problems that face the world are more immediate. COVID-19, an attack on democratic processes around the world. Certainly in the United States, but I think elsewhere, a full-blown assault on science and our educational institutions at all levels. And the list of immediate serious problems is long. And so you might think that what the liberal arts are doing, how are we doing in the liberal arts is a bit of a trivial problem to work on. But I want to suggest that I suspect that you might also suspect that if everybody had a liberal arts education, we wouldn't be in the mess we are in today. And that, in a sense, is the justification for this talk. The project focuses on, okay, what's a liberal arts education look like? And if it's obviously true that what we suspect, that if everybody had a liberal arts education, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in today. If it were true, we would be in a situation where we wouldn't have discovered, for example, that out of the 1,000 least educated counties, those where fewer than 16% of the adults have a college degree in America, that out of 1,000 of them, 900 of them voted for Donald Trump. We wouldn't be in a world in which we saw the obvious consequences of not having an education. So today I'm not going to provide a global answer to the question of how to measure a liberal arts question, but I'm going to show that we have a set of new ways of identifying what such an education looks like, some new ways of thinking about the structure of knowledge that undergraduates, when they go to college, confront, and some ways of understanding why a liberal education works. And then if we have time, trying to understand why women drift away from STEM majors. So that's a lot of things to try to cover. I'm going to do it at a very high level and hopefully leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to talk about four things. In the first part of this talk, which will be short, I'm going to extract vocabularies, words from course descriptions that allow us to distinguish between a liberal arts school and other schools. It's a very simple thing I'm going to do. In the second part, I'm going to consider an idea of recombination and interdisciplinarity as hallmarks of what a liberal education is, assess whether that's actually true, and then suggest what the impact of their presence might be. In the third part, I'm going to try to map out the topology of knowledge that undergraduates confront overall, without considering what kind of college they go to, and try to see what are we teaching them in a sense. How do we present the world to them? And then, as I said already, in the fourth part, I'm going to consider new ways to assess the relationship between representation and STEM outcomes. So hopefully I'll get through all of this in time. So let me turn then to the first part of the talk, which is, can we identify a unique vocabulary that distinguishes liberal arts institutions from others? So to answer that question, we're going to draw on new kinds of data. In this case, what we'll draw on is the universe of every course description from schools that are universally thought to be liberal arts institutions, and schools which are universally understood to be universities, which may or may not have a liberal arts college within them. So our data are going to be course descriptions. The design approach is simple. It's to ask whether there exists a unique vocabulary that liberal arts institutions express in their course descriptions. And then once we have that vocabulary, we can capture course descriptions for any school and understand the extent to which that course, and aggregate it up to all classes in that course, understand the extent to which they can express what we're measuring, which we'll call liberal artsness or LAE-ness. So it's a very simple design. And to get this vocabulary, we do something super simple. We combine all the liberal arts and all the non-liberal arts word phrases from all course descriptions. Take, in this case, the 3,800 word phrases that appear most frequently, and look at the percentage of occurrence of those word phrases in liberal arts school course descriptions versus in non-liberal arts school course descriptions. So to read this graph, each dot's an actual word phrase. On the horizontal axis, the word students occurs a little over 1.5% of all word phrase occurrences in non-liberal arts schools. And on the vertical axis, it occurs about 2% over all word phrases in liberal arts schools. So both of these scales are logarithmic, and you can see students in the far right top of this slide. The color of the data, or of the dots or the words, changes at the point of a linear regression line, which I don't show to keep things clean. And what you can see is that overall, words distinguish the texts of liberal arts schools and non-liberal arts schools to the extent that they are low on one axis and high on the other. So words to the bottom left of the graph distinguish the two kinds of schools, while those at the top right, like students, don't. So to better identify words more specific to liberal arts and non-liberal arts schools, we first form a ratio of the proportion of occurrences of a word in a liberal arts text to the proportion of occurrence of the word in a non-liberal arts text. So this is super simple. And then we find words that are 1.5 or so standard deviations in the liberal arts direction from the average of this ratio. And that results in 227 words that are substantially more likely to be specific to a liberal arts education than to a non-liberal arts education. So what can we do with that? Well, we can see that if we identify a unique vocabulary that distinguishes liberal arts institutions from others, or we ask, can we do that? The answer is yes. And this means that for all schools for which we have course descriptions and for all classes for which we have course descriptions, either from syllabi or from course catalogs, we can assign them a probability of expressing liberal artsness. And then we can see that we can actually decouple liberal arts schools, which are in red here, from universities. So this is a very, very simple kind of thing. And we can actually see that this has a little bit deeper structure than simply decoupling liberal arts schools from universities. If we take out the arts and letters component of universities, we can see that we really improve the partition. All the liberal arts schools, the schools that are unambiguously thought of as liberal arts, are way up, clustered densely together, whereas the universities are in another state space. And if we compare universities' arts and letters, that is the component of the university that is the liberal arts expression of that university, with standalone liberal arts schools, it worsens the partition, but it still remains. So something unique is happening at these clearly liberal arts schools that's not happening at large universities. And you can do this also for within disciplines. Here, it's arts and humanities courses yield a very crisp partition. And you might not be surprised to discover that the semantic signature of the unique teaching that happens in a liberal arts school is less distinctive for science courses than it is, say, for arts and humanities courses. So this is a really simple thing, but it sets up something that we'll need to do, which is to say we can identify liberal artsness as a characteristic of schools, and that will turn out to be an interesting independent variable for helping us understand later what the educational impact of a liberal arts school is. Now we don't need to have universal agreement as to what the school is. We can actually get a measure of it independently of sort of folk knowledge that says, oh yeah, in the American context, McAllister, Amherst, Davis, and so on are liberal arts schools. We could actually decide what they are on the basis of their shared vocabulary. So a little bit of the first thing is, yeah, you can do some things with natural language processing, super simple things that identify a distinctive signature to liberal arts. So now I want to try to, I showed that slide. Now I want to turn to part two and basically say, can we focus on an idea, in this case, the recombination of knowledge as a hallmark of liberal arts education? So the motivation for thinking about that is the following. When liberal arts schools make claims on their behalf, they're not subtle. Variously, the presidents of those schools or their boards or their catalogs make the claim that attendance benefits students by shaping their ability to think critically, to develop purposefulness, tolerance, curiosity, empathy, and to exert leadership. Students and their parents are told that their mental and physical health will be better if they go to a liberal arts school, and that in the long run, their prospects for future employment will be enhanced. They are told they will be lifelong learners. So we won't talk about whether any of those outcomes, critical thinking, their ability to live a purposeful life, and so on. We won't talk about whether any of those outcomes arise or not, although I will tell you that we can show that recombination is positively associated with earnings. But rather, we're going to focus on understanding what it might be specifically about the liberal arts experience that makes possible the benefits that are claimed on its behalf. That is, we'll ask, what is it about liberal arts education experiences that shapes meaning making? So, as in the previous first part, the entry point of this project are the courses that students take at college. So just as we did in the first part, we consider the unique vocabularies that arise from course descriptions. Our goal is to abstract from those vocabularies elements which differentiate a liberal arts education experience from other educational experiences. And to anticipate the main finding, we're going to discover that one of the aspects of those vocabularies that liberal arts courses capitalize on and create the possibilities for is what we'll call ideational recombination. That is the recombination of knowledge. So why do we care about recombination? Well, educators in higher education, especially those in liberal arts colleges, routinely claim that the hallmark of their system, the element of the educational experience that they most value and which contributes most to students' abilities to integrate learning, are the recombinant possibilities embedded within the liberal arts curriculum. So there's a claim about that. And second, there's a robust literature in science studies that indicates that innovation is achieved by putting together existing concepts that would otherwise not be connected. So there's a claim on the part of the schools, and there's scientific evidence that innovation occurs by combining things. So against that background, what we're going to do is measure recombinational capability as expressed through course descriptions, routinely offered in liberal arts and non-liberal arts colleges and universities. And we're going to do this in the simplest way possible. We're going to capture the claims that schools make about their recombinatorial experience by analyzing the semantic structure of their course descriptions, including liberal arts schools and non-liberal arts schools. And we're going to do this, as I said, in the simplest possible way. So the data are 162,000 or so unique undergraduate course descriptions, which are going to be defined as arising from schools that come from high status schools, low status schools, liberal arts schools, and other schools. And we're going to ask which kind of schools are more likely to describe their course content, that is, as the teachers write what they say is happening in their course, in terms that we associate with recombination. That is, terms like redefine, reshape, intersect, interconnect, intertwine, interplay, complex relationship, reconcile, bridge, and weave, and so on. So there's a class of words that make claims about recombination. We identify those words, and we're just going to do something super simple. We're going to count them. For each institution, we're going to compare the occurrences of those keywords to the grand mean of occurrences of those kinds of words across all institutions. So this is really, really simple. So what do we discover? The answer is some kinds of schools make this claim. Other kinds of schools don't. That is, some kinds of schools use these words in their course descriptions to describe what's happening in the school. But if you look at this graph, what you can see is that it's school status that drives the claim of recombination, not school type. Right? So it's school status. High status liberal arts schools and high status top universities make the claim that they're recombining. Non-top universities and non-top liberal arts schools don't make this claim. So this is the first thing. They're saying, but saying and doing aren't necessarily the same thing. To verify if schools actually do what they claim, we look at the practice of recombination through social network clustering of a set of paired concepts that effectively represent two distant knowledge domains. The clustering is based on a shared linguistic context of each concept in the corpus achieved in a word-to-vec algorithm. And instead of focusing on the catalog, which is written for parents and written for students, we draw from the actual course syllabi. So I'm going to spend a minute on discussing the syllabi data set. And here we focus on that part of the syllabus that describes the content of the course. What we're going to do is we're going to identify 69 concepts in different course syllabi, which are both frequent enough in the corpuses to provide analytic leverage and distant enough from each other to generally reflect the fact that they arise from and are associated with different knowledge domains. For each school, we identify the 50 closest terms using cosine similarity, and thus collect a total of 100 concepts or words to represent the two collections of concepts. Two words that come from the same domain share the same closest terms, whereas those that come from distant domains will not share the same terms. Then, using a very simple network strategy of co-occurrence for the analysis of text, we draw an edge between two words if they appear in the same course syllabus. That gives rise to a network representation of two concepts, and we measure characteristics of those concept networks across schools, cross-classified by the type of school that they are, whether they're a liberal arts versus another school, or whether they are high status versus low status. So I hope that wasn't too complicated, but I think an example will make this clearer. Here, for example, is the network of, I skipped this slide. So we're going to draw this, we're going to randomly draw a pair of concepts, say discourse and a particle. And each of those words, discourse will be associated with 50 other words, and particle will be associated with 50 other words. And then we're going to be able to assess whether the likelihood of discourse and particle being in the same syllabus involves a recombination of distinct knowledge or not. So sorry, I skipped a slide. The result then is a network of concepts. In this case, the words are embodied in organization that are not typically found together as they're observed in a high status liberal arts and a high status university courses. You can see that in the university corpus, the network, which is on the right, is split into two smaller components relative to the structure for the liberal arts on the left. Building from work in the sociology of science, recombination would be expressed through fewer disjoint clusters and larger components. So basically the idea is if we find two words like embodied in organization that aren't typically found in the same state space, we build the set of words that are around them and then ask, do liberal arts schools recombine them in different ways than their peers in the universities. And that's what you can see across multiple simulations of random concept pairs. Liberal arts schools are always associated with fewer and larger components, indicating recombination of disjoint components in practice, whatever their status. So here's the end result of that is that once we do 50 random pairs, 100 random pairs, 500 random pairs, we always see in liberal arts schools that they are actually recombining knowledge more extensively than in the high status university. So what schools do, claim to do, and what schools actually do differ. High status universities make claims to recombination in their curricula. They get that this is, in fact, how people learn to innovate, but in practice, their courses do this less. That is, their courses don't confront students with opportunities for recombining ideas. In contrast, liberal arts courses do confront students with many opportunities for recombining ideas. So far, we've seen that liberal arts schools can be identified by their unique vocabularies, and that one aspect of their vocabulary is that it encourages and facilitates knowledge recombination. And this may be why liberal arts school students are often thought to be more innovative, more tolerant, and creative than their comparable university-educated peers. They experience courses which help them adapt to and navigate the highly complex and multivalent natural and social context that they find themselves in. It's possible that this is what is actually unique to a liberal arts education. In work that I'm not going to talk about today, we actually show that their income returns to the exposure of recombinant classes for liberal arts students. We'll use a simulation strategy to show that I'll talk about in the fourth part of this talk. But so far, I've gotten two little pieces of information. One is we can distinguish liberal arts schools from other schools by virtue of their vocabularies. Two, that a critical element of their vocabulary is that they are recombinant, not distinctly in what they claim, but distinctly in how they're teaching. That is what is happening as derived from a syllabus. Okay, now I'm going to try to shift gears a little bit, and we're halfway through, which I'm sure you're relieved at, and talk about what undergraduates experience. What's the structure of knowledge in the United States, at any rate, that an undergraduate confronts? In the previous section, I barely introduced the core data structure that we've been working with, which is the open syllabus project data, which we use to distinguish what instructors and schools do versus what they claim to do. In those analyses, we focus on the text of the syllabus, analogous to the text of the course description in the course catalog. Here, I'm going to make use of another key element of the syllabus, which is the works that students are assigned to read. Subsequently, we'll look at how those works read, how works read, and how instructor gender shapes the educational experience that college students have. But here we'll just focus only on the works without worrying too much about the instructor. So in this case, our data are from the Open Syllabus Project. The data set contains about 2 million syllabi from 2,000 schools with about 13 million citations, that is, reading assignments, bibliographic elements, things for students to read. So it contains about 13 million citations over 2.5 million unique works. So the many citations are obviously to the same thing. We build an analysis data set that's necessarily smaller, but still representative. And it's these data that we'll talk about moving forward over on the right. The problem that we'll tackle is what's the landscape of knowledge look like from the point of view of students, or more precisely, what is the landscape of knowledge that they confront if they could actually see the whole thing, which they can't. So this may seem like an arcane problem that only sociologists or maybe only sociologists of science could be interested in, but it's pretty practical actually and important. Here's some questions that you can ask yourself as I'm talking and develop some intuitions about the answers. And you can check your intuitions at the end. And I'll make sure that I have the answers to all these questions. So one would be, which division of school, social science, science, or humanities, is more coherent? That is composed technically in terms of coherence by disciplines that are close to each other. So which division is more coherent? Second, which division, social sciences, humanities, or sciences, is dislocated from the others, bears no contact with them? Third, which divisions and which disciplines are characterized by a mismatch between what students cover in their introductory courses and what they cover in their advanced courses? So some disciplines, there's a mismatch, some there's not. A fourth question, is anthropology as a discipline closer to religion, to biology, or to philosophy? And finally, just because we're sociologists, is there anything unique to sociology which is not completely covered by other disciplines? Okay. So those are some orienting questions. The data that we're going to use is in the 15 core disciplines described on the right. The methodology that we're going to use is not simple to execute. All the other methods have been pretty simple, but I think I can describe it simply enough. So each syllabus has weekly reading assignments. Those assignments reference texts, and so they are citations. We have in our little data set 118,000 unique citations. For example, the citation, read Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, Chapter 1. The citation is to Smith. Each syllabus is represented as a network of citations. If in the same course that we read Smith, we also read Marx, then we would have an edge on that network between Smith and Marx, or whatever else is assigned. We're going to observe the co-occurrence of works on a syllabus, and that's going to yield 13 million edges. Each edge is weighted by their co-occurrence, and we compare the networks to each other by using a node-to-vec algorithm that transforms each network, which is a syllabus, so transforms each syllabus turned into a network, into a vector in 128-dimensional space. And that vector then is a point in that space where closer points are more similar to each other. Courses with the same kinds of assignments are teaching the same kinds of things. So that's the principle. Here, consider some focal courses in a variety of disciplines. You can see that the courses that are identified as most like those focal courses are just like them. So, for example, the course most like the American South from Civil War to Sunbelt is History of the New South, History of the U.S. South, Seminar on the History of the American South. The course most like Applied Matrix Algebra is Computational Linear Algebra, Matrix Algebra, and Elementary Linear Algebra. So the distance between syllabus embeddings can identify similar courses. So we know that this works, okay? This also is true for readings or for authors. The closest work to Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism are the greatest hits of social theory. They are not books on religion, for example. They're Durkheim, Giddens, Koser, and Marx. So again, we know that this works at the level of the course and it works at the level of the author. We can also see that this measure generates relationships between disciplines that have face validity. Here, each cell is a pairwise comparison. Have face validity. Here, each cell, right, is a pairwise comparison using cosine similarity, with darker cells are more similar to each other. The dendrogram that you might be able to see on the left of this slide shows hierarchical clustering according to these similarities, and you can see three clear partitions in any case. The sciences and humanities cluster quite tightly together, and the social sciences down at the bottom are less cohesive. Again, the darker the cells, the more similar they are. So you can see the first block of cells in humanities, classics, English, history, philosophy, religion, they're all tightly coherent. The next division, biology, chemistry, earth science, math, and physics is tight. The social sciences are not coherent. Okay, so to answer one of the questions we asked, which division is less coherent? It's social science. Second question that we asked, which is, there are lots of interesting things to see. And one of the things you can see is that philosophy and religion have nothing, and I mean nothing because it's absolutely white, to do with anthropology, which is much closer to biology. And for those of you who know me, you'll certainly be amused to discover that despite being a philosophy, economics has nothing to do with that discipline. We can gain more insight into the structure of knowledge as it confronts students by plotting disciplines in space, focusing on the topography, which allows for a richer representation than that simple matrix. Here we map all courses by core discipline, there are 15 disciplines, 5 each for science, humanities, and social science that are found in all schools. The feature that stands out most clearly is that the sciences are disjoint from the rest of the curriculum, connected by only a small earth sciences bridge. So we ask this question, which division is disjoint? It's science in the United States. Burrowing into the social sciences, notice the relative separation of economics and psychology, and the centrality of sociology, but also the general absence of distance between disciplines, which are brought into conversation with one another through shared methods. So there's very little of sociology that's not covered by other disciplines. And what brings everything together is shared method in the social science. The situation is different in the sciences. Mathematics is pulled away from the substantive fields, which use math but are distinct from it. The gap between the life and the physical sciences is marked. Chemistry and earth sciences borrow from both, but we have an image of largely disjoint disciplines. With respect to the question about consilience, which you asked before, science in this sense is losing the race. This is especially clear in contrast to the humanities, which is simply one giant component of overlapping assignments, reading assignments, pulled into sub-areas by US history on the bottom left and literature on the right. So this is a very simple topography, but it hasn't done anything really about the educational experience. So here I'm going to try to do that, to try to introduce the world of students in terms of their kind of maturity in the program. So the previous slides focus on the whole of the knowledge space. Now I'm going to consider how course level shapes the fields that students confront. First, for social sciences. What's striking, if you move from the left to the right, from lower courses to intermediate courses to advanced courses to graduate courses, is change over time. In the social sciences, the materials of economics are totally disjoint at the introductory level from other fields, which are also isolated and distinct. By the time one becomes a graduate student, the distinction between disciplines is largely elided. It's probably worth asking if there's another way to teach social science to undergraduates. So the mismatch between what we're teaching undergraduates and what we're teaching graduate students or advanced students is quite marked in the social sciences. In contrast, for the sciences, disciplines emerge as distinct entities more as course levels increase. The central points become more distinct and more distinct from one another. So this is the reverse of the consilience pattern you might have expected. But again, what happens is with specialized knowledge comes specialized disciplines rather than a mush. Here in the humanities, it looks like nothing happens to the space, but there's an important digging in, a filling out of the same content that's covered in introductory courses. So this digging in versus new field orientation is telling us something about the undergraduate education. The sciences have a different knowledge mobility pathway than the humanities. In the sciences, students move to new areas of the discipline as they progress through their major. The disciplines become more and more distinct from one another. In the humanities, students fill in already traversed topics, and the distance between disciplines decreases. In the social sciences is a bit of a mix of both. We can see all of this extremely clearly. Which is better? I don't know, but they're different. Maybe we'll be able to take this measure and associate it later with something that is better. Okay, so what did all of that tell us? Well, one, I think there was an obvious methodological point. That's to the big data point. We can combine publicly available text from colleges and universities with natural language processing to make meaningful distinctions concerning the education of students. That can generate novel findings regarding how undergraduates are taught and learn. And that in turn creates possibilities for novel findings regarding how disciplines think differently about the structure of knowledge within and across fields. And our analysis suggests that the social sciences are much more confused about what they think they know than humanities and natural sciences, but we shouldn't be surprised by that. Okay, you've been super patient, and I'm going to shift then to the final part that I want to talk about. Again, a little bit of introduction. What we're trying to do is say, can we take digital data and measure it in new ways to get new insights about what happens to students to later use the insights as predictors for outcomes that we care about? So far, I haven't really gotten to an outcome that you might care about, but now I'm going to focus on one that's more central, which is women and retention in STEM. So the topic is gender in STEM, and the background's familiar to all of us. Despite the fact that women have outnumbered men in undergraduate enrollment numbers since the 1980s in the United States, women remain underrepresented among students in disciplines related to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, that is, in STEM disciplines. So understanding why that's true has emerged as a central topic in educational research. Now, there's no simple answer to why women are underrepresented in STEM, so that's going to tell us, the dynamics are really complex. But here we're going to focus on one obvious factor, which is representation, and bring this idea of representation, bring some new material to it, give us a new way of thinking about it. The way we're going to think about representation is with respect to role models, which is very traditional, which we're going to operationalize as female instructors, which is very traditional. And then less traditionally, we're going to operationalize as female authors. So the basic idea is simple. We're going to ask whether or not we can capture the extent of exposure to role models for students in different disciplines at different kinds of colleges. Our intuition is that such exposure is likely to be limited in STEM disciplines relative to courses required by colleges as fulfilling distribution requirements, that this limited exposure is potentially ameliorated by the kind of school one goes to, liberal arts or other, and that there's a systematic relationship between disparate exposure to role models and disparate outcomes for women. So the intuition is simple, but like all things, getting to a place where we can observe it's more complicated. To make progress, we'll use the open syllabus data. I just described that data, so as a reminder, this is what we're working with. What we're going to do is try to think about gender representation by discipline across class type. Part of the distributional requirements per school, that is a class part of a distributional requirement per school. By class level, that is, it is an introductory, intermediate, or advanced. And by school type, that is, it is a liberal arts school, a high status school, a university, public, private, religious, and so on. So we're going to make inferences to the educational experiences of students attending thousands of schools of different types. And we're going to think about those experiences not simply as taking this or that course, a specific course, but rather a summary of all the courses taken by different majors over the course of their collegiate career. Since our data come from syllabi that contain information that allows us to allocate courses to disciplines, you saw that previously, capture the works that are assigned to students, which we relied on to get the topography, and for all syllabi for which we can assign discipline, and for all of those which we can assign a gender to the instructor, we capture the name of the first author of the texts assigned to students and assign them the works as either written by men or women. So just to be specific, we predict the gender of each author and instructor using the commercially available classification service Genderize. And Genderize returns results for about 41% of the syllabi in our data with an accuracy of around 97%. So there's a bunch of other variables, of course. We're going to augment the syllabus data, the reading assignment, and the gender classification data with course level, school type, gender distribution of the student body, elite status, among others. And we'll restrict our analysis to 23 core academic disciplines. So after doing all of that, our data report 296,000 syllabi from 1,117 colleges. So that's 1,177 colleges. Okay, so here's some interesting results, I think. On the x-axis is percentage male instructors, on the y-axis is percentage male authored works of all works assigned on the syllabus. And the first thing to see is that disciplines vary considerably in gender makeup. Okay, so you can see percentage male instructor there. You can see that women's studies is an exception, has very few, has more females. Disciplines vary considerably in gender makeup, but instructor and author gender are strongly correlated. Women's study is more female than any other field. Sociology is pretty balanced. Physics, math, econ, and the rest of the sciences, with the exception of biology, are bastions of maleness. And if we're going to understand the experience of students taking courses and reading works in terms of gender representation of both the teachers, the faculty, and the authors, we're going to have to pay attention to discipline. So with that in mind, we develop a model to predict the proportion of assignments that students have in each course that they take, which are authored by males. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we've already seen that male instructor and discipline are highly correlated, and we have a good reason to suspect that male instructors assign more male readings than females do. Likewise, it makes sense that school type influences the pattern of assignment, as does course level. And from this table, you can see that instructor gender has a strong and significant effect across all the models, and that this is attenuated by the inclusion of discipline, as one would expect. Specifically, male instructors assigned 8% more male authors than female instructors. Courses in liberal arts schools assign about 2% fewer male authors compared to other kinds of schools. Status exhibits no significant effect on gender representation, and the discipline really matters. Still, if you look at this, you realize the predictors of assigning a male-authored text are pretty minimal and largely trivial. They seem to be, but the question is, are they? Well, they are at the individual course level, but no student takes only one course. The question of what an educational experience is one that can be answered only for the entire career of the student. So to understand the extent of gender disparity in experience by major, we have to simulate the careers of undergraduates. When we do that, we discover that small effects have a large cumulative impact. So we engage in a simulation that's described on the slide. Each student is assigned a major out of a bunch of majors. We simulate 150,000 students, 1,000 in each kind of school type combination. They take 30 to 40 courses that are divided into major courses, distribution requirements, and free elective courses. Courses are probabilistically assigned disciplines and levels based on the number that they have. And then we simulate the gender of the professor, the number of assigned readings, and the gender of the reading authors based on the best fitting model. So we basically simulate an entire educational experience. And what we can see is that looking at the whole career, the effects are pretty astonishing. Small differences in each course accumulate into huge representation inequalities. Here we show on the x-axis student major. The science courses are on the left. The y-axis reports the proportion of in-major classes where there is no female representation, I mean no, as either faculty or readings. The red line is the likelihood of no female representation as a whole. You can see that in physics, chemistry, math, and econ, more than 60% of the first major courses have no female representation as authors or as instructors. 45% of the first two major courses have no female representation. More than a quarter of the first three classes. Given that students decide on majors after one or two classes, are we surprised to discover that women thinking about majoring in science or economics who've never encountered a female professor or a female reading would wonder if the field is fit for them? But here's the thing, school type matters, and this is the last slide. Looking at the problem another way, just a sheer count of the number of female authors ever read in any course by different majors in different kinds of schools, we can see that the situation is pretty bad in the sciences overall. But that even in the sciences, and certainly for other majors, attending a liberal arts college makes a big difference in sheer exposure to women. This is, by the way, also how status expresses itself. In high status schools, students get more reading assignments. And so just because of that opportunity, the sheer count of women they're exposed to is greater. But that fact shouldn't distract us from the observation that with respect to representation, female students have more role models in the sciences and in economics in liberal arts colleges. If their pools of applicants were similar to those at universities, retention in STEM would be higher. This suggests that what we do with our classes, what shapes students' experiences, matters. And obviously, we can do better. So that was 4 short talks, 46 minutes. You've been very patient. I hope that, it made some sense, but luckily, I think Manu Kim is going to solve all the problems for us now. Thank you very much. There's a lot of work to be done, but I hope it was interesting.
It was. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I was like, I don't know, I was blew in my mind, and remembered that I thought about your short writing on the heuristics of discovery. You saw the relationship in a very different way that actually revealed the connection between discipline in a very noble way. So thank you very much.
What would you do if you suddenly were miraculously in charge of university curriculum? What implication might that have for the curriculum as a whole, and specifically for sociology? So I think that with respect to the curriculum as a whole, and with respect to the simple goal of trying to enhance gender equality across STEM, I've already proposed a very simple fix, which is increased representation at no cost to the school or to the instructors by simply assigning women authors. With respect to the benefits of recombination, I think one thing I didn't show, because it's just a little too complicated, is that using the same kind of complex simulation strategy by which we simulated the careers of hundreds of thousands of undergraduates to get to the gender finding, we also are able to simulate the careers of hundreds of thousands of students across all of the universities in the United States to generate a distribution of exposures to recombination. And what we're able to show is that greater exposure to recombination has a positive effect on earnings in the year and the first and second years after graduation. So it seems to me that employers are able to discern a quality in candidates, which is their exposure to recombination, and that quality must be expressed during their job search process, which yields them slightly higher incomes. And I think that has a really important implication because it shifts the dialogue a little bit. In the American context, schools, universities are under assault because they're not teaching skills that are usable. But this then shifts the dialogue a bit. It says, actually, the capacity to recombine or to combine unusual disjoint ideas is rewarded by the market. And so I think an implication would be that you would build a curriculum that actually focused on exposure to recombination. Now, I'm not sure I would design that curriculum on the basis of these findings. I think you'd probably have to do some actual experimenting, but that would be easy enough to do. And I think that the implication for sociology should be consistent with that, which is that sociology, insofar as it's a powerful discipline, should stress its recombinant capacities. I have no reason to say that. I just believe that that must be true logically. So those are the key and important questions. This is preliminary work, and so I appreciate being asked them a lot.
Thank you so much. As time is actually running out, I will let it pass the due time, and it's close to his bedtime. Just thank you for everyone. We changed the schedule last week. I'm very sorry about that. But despite of that fact, thank you for coming. And also, I just want to make a little note at the end. The representation. When I was his students, Peter's students back at Columbia, the last day of my graduation, he told me, like the first gendered comments. And you did it. And it's actually really impressive, like given the fact that you're a woman. I was like, oh, was I a woman? I was really surprised because I never felt like I was treated as any other gender. We are just like, I'm a student of his. Like, in a way, I think it's also the way he described it during the talk. It's meaning of the trace. Like, there is a difference. I look different, but I never actually give a meaning to that. So Peter was my role model, despite of the gender difference. So I wanted to say thank you for that. With that, I will let you go. And thank you very much for the Professor Lanu Kim for the wonderful discussion and for all the audience and participant in the room. Thank you very much. Hopefully I will see you next week again.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.